Hello, my name is Daniel, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the First and 10 Sports Podcast, where we will talk all things football. Now, my first episode is going to be on the Pittsburgh Steelers and looking back on their past season, their offseason, and where they're headed. And to effectively look at the 2019 season, you have to first look at where they were coming from. They went 9-6-1 in 2018 and narrowly missed out in the playoffs, so expectations were still pretty high for the team. And the NFL and fans alike both thought the team would succeed, and they were given the Week 1 matchup against the reigning Super Bowl champs in Foxborough, and it didn't go as planned. The Steelers got destroyed and only put up 3 points, and although most fans hoped it would get better, the next week might have been worse than that crushing defeat because they lost their quarterback Ben Roethlisberger for the whole year. Typically, after losing your starting quarterback, especially when you don't have a proven backup, the season seems like it's gone and you have no shot of competing. But the Steelers made a move that was a little shocking. They decided to trade their first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick, the defender from the Miami Dolphins. Now, Minkah was a first-round pick in 2018 out of Alabama, and he was known for being able to play a lot of places in the secondary. And he kind of complained about that in Miami and wanted to play more single high safety because that's where he felt he was best, and that's more of what he did in Pittsburgh. Now, the trade, as of right now, looks like a great move by the Steelers, but at the time it was questionable because the Steelers were 0-2 and looking at possibly getting a top 5, likely top 10 pick. And after they trade for Minkah for a short while, it didn't get much better. They ended up at 1-4, and it looked like that first round pick could end up being a top 5 pick. But after a few more games, it looked like the Steelers were turning it around, and it's a bit unclear why to most people. But after looking at it, I think that it's almost all the credit is deserving for the defense because they were really just tough to beat at any point. And the defense had great players on all 3 levels of the field. They had stellar corner play in Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson, who never really just allowed big plays. They had Minkah playing center field, and he forced a lot of turnovers, as did the whole defense for that matter. And in the center of the field, they had rookie first-round pick Devin Bush, who they traded up from pick 20 to 10 for in the 2019 NFL Draft. And they had stellar edge production from TJ Watt, and in addition, they had Bud Dupree, who had somewhat of a breakout season of his own. Now, Dupree and Watt were both first-round picks, but it seemed that only Watt was living up to that title. Dupree had never logged a great season until last year, where he produced double-digit sacks, and Watt was always seen as a guy with the potential to be great, and last year he showed it, and I think that next year he could be in the Defensive Player of the Year race, if not the front-runner, because he makes plays all over the field. He's exceptional at forcing fumbles. He's great at just applying pressure, and he's also reading the quarterback and paying attention because he gets a lot of swats and deflections that most players aren't getting because they're not paying as much attention to everything that's going around. And the Steelers also had good interior play with Cameron Hayward and Javon Hargrave. Now, I don't expect their interior to be as good next year because they lost Javon Hargrave in free agency to the Philadelphia Eagles, but Hayward was the star and he's still there, and although he is aging, he still should put up great numbers and be a stout force in the run defense game. And in the draft, the Steelers didn't do a lot to shore up their defense. They spent a 3rd-round pick on edge Alex Highsmith, and they spent a 6th-round pick on Antoine Brooks, a strong safety who can play more in the box while Minkah would roam over the top if they decide to bench Edmonds. And they also decided to defensive tackle Carlos Davis. They drafted him late in the draft, and he is just probably going to be a rotational piece at best, And they also, in free agency, traded for defensive tackle Chris Wormley, and they only had to give up a 5th and a future 7th. Now, by no means am I saying Chris Wormley is a great player, but it's tough to find a great or even good player in the 5th round. So giving that pick up for a safe player like Wormley is always a good deal. And then on the offensive side of the field, the team wasn't very good last year. And I think most of that came down to the quarterback play. They had 2 horrendous quarterback options once Big Ben went down in Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. And after looking at them both, I think I prefer Mason Rudolph because although neither of them are good, Mason Rudolph possesses the arm strength to keep the defenses guessing. Now, he doesn't have great accuracy, probably not even good accuracy, but he has the ability to throw the ball deep, intermediate, and short, so the defense has to play all 3 parts of the field, while Hodges' arm is really weak. There are some plays where partially it's on his decision-making of not getting the ball out in time, where he just floats the ball in there late, and the defenders are going to be able to jump the route and get interceptions that they shouldn't be getting otherwise. But next year, their quarterback play shouldn't be an issue because they have a solid quarterback coming back. And although he's old, he's been a proven producer in Ben Roethlisberger. Now, in the run game, they had James Conner, Benny Snell, and converted tight end Jalen Samuels. And James Conner, although he does have his injury history, is a solid football player. He's really good at just running between the tackles. And although I don't expect him to have as much success next year between the tackles when healthy, I think it'll be close to that level because the team lost guard Ramon Foster to retirement. But I think that Conner will still be able to have those plays where as long as he gets one block going his way, he can take a 3-yard run, turn it into a 5, 10, 15-yard run with a truck, a spin, or just solid vision. Now, where Conner was not good last season was anywhere outside of the tackles. He doesn't possess elite athleticism. He only runs a 4.65 40, and he doesn't have the lateral quickness to make one man miss when he's trying to secure the edge. So anytime the Steelers really designed an outside zone or any sort of run that relied on him going outside the tackle and beating a man to the outside, it was the same story of him never being able to get more than a yard, and almost always he's getting tackled for a loss near the sideline because he couldn't get there fast enough. And on the receiving core, the Steelers have a nice trio of young wideouts in Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, and James Washington. They also added tight end Eric Ebron in free agency, and although they lost Nick Vannett, Eric Ebron is a great upgrade. They also have Vance McDonald, and they drafted Chase Claypool in the 2nd round with their first pick in the 2020 NFL Draft. Now, the receivers didn't put up great numbers last year, but as I am with a lot of things with this offense, I'm attributing it to the terrible quarterback play. And Juju, who had sky-high expectations, didn't live up to any of them, but he still showed flashes and some great plays that show us why we think, as fans, he can become one of the next great receivers, as he's still extremely young at only 23 or 24 years of age. They also, after trading for away Antonio Brown, got a 3rd-round pick and more, and they used this 3rd-round pick, which was a top 70 pick, to select wide receiver Deontay Johnson out of Toledo. Now, Johnson was relatively unheard of before coming to Pittsburgh, but he really showed me and a lot of other people the talent he has with some great athleticism and the ability to make plays with when the ball's in the air or when the ball's in his hands. He can jump and get great air and catch the ball over defenders, and he can make them miss on the ground. They also have James Washington, who had a solid year last year, but I think part of that was because he and Mason Rudolph were teammates in college, so they already developed a chemistry that no one else had with either Rudolph or Hodges. And this is part of what makes the Chase Claypool pick so shocking, because they already have 3 great receivers, And Claypool doesn't seem to really fit in, especially with the two tight ends that they're capable of playing at the same time. And that got me thinking, because I don't think Claypool's a great prospect by any means. He's a freak athlete. He's in the mold of the Evan Ingrams, who's a tight end. Claypool's more of a big slot, wide receiver, tight end hybrid kind of guy. But Claypool doesn't really excel at beating coverage, catching the ball in the air, and he doesn't have great hands, and he doesn't play as fast as his 40 times showed. So it worries me that he's a bit raw right now, but the Steelers have turned lots of wide receivers into great players, even if they were only so-so prospects coming out of college. They took Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders in the same draft, both late picks, Sanders in the third and Brown in the sixth. They took Juju in the second in 2017, James Washington in 2018, and a guy I'm really high on in Deontay Johnson in the third in 2019. So, although I want to doubt the Steelers in their choice of Chase Claypool, I believe that they will be able to develop him and make him a great wide receiver. Now, if Chase Claypool does develop into the player the Steelers hope he does, the Steelers have a surplus of wide receivers. It's really rare for a team to be running 4 wide receivers more than once or twice a game on a play, and Juju's contract is up soon. The Steelers in 2021 have only $28 million of cap space. Juju's a free agent after 2020 and is likely demanding upwards of $15 million, depending on the season he has. So if hypothetically he only asks for $15 or $16 million, the Steelers shouldn't be paying him. They will hopefully have a solid wide receiver in Claypool. I think a good wide receiver in Deontay Johnson and another solid guy in James Washington. And paying over half of your available salary cap to one player isn't the smartest move. And there have been rumors recently that the Steelers have been willing to shop Juju. And at first I didn't buy them, especially before the draft. But now that they drafted Claypool early, it really seems like a trade for Juju is likely. And wide receiver is probably the most likely position to get traded. We saw Odell and Amari Cooper, 2 big names. Amari netted a first, Odell netted a first, a third, and a former first-round player in Jabril Peppers. So I think if the Steelers can get a first-round pick for Juju, they should do it. I'm not sure if they will, but if they're able to save some available future cap space, they should most definitely try and do that. The Steelers also have James Conner's contract coming up soon, and he said he wants to be a Steeler for life, and I believe him. He went to Pitt for college. He's on the Steelers. He really seems to have a connection to the city, and I think he'd be willing to take a big pay cut and not make big money, not that he deserves it, to stay in the Steel City. The Steelers also drafted competent running back Anthony McFarland in the 4th round out of Maryland. And although McFarland and Conner are 2 separate backs, I think they'd be a great 1-2 punch for 4 or 5 years to come. While Conner excels between the tackles, McFarland is dominant at getting to the edge and using his breakaway speed. He's the son of disgraced Monday Night Football announcer Booger McFarland, and he's just a really good football player at specific things. In the Ohio State-Maryland game in 2018, and this was an Ohio State team with guys like Dwayne Haskins, Jeff Okudah, Chase Young, and many more, he single-handedly kept the Maryland Terrapins in the game. They came in as huge underdogs and almost walked out with a win. And McFarland's 3 monster runs at the beginning of the game should be what most people look at when seeing why Maryland was able to keep in the game. McFarland can get to the outside better than almost anyone else who was in college football the past few years, and I think his talent will translate to the NFL. He's not that big in terms of height, but he has solid weight and solid speed. I'm talking better than 4.45, so he can just run past almost any defender on the field at any point. And I'm excited for the Steelers running game. I'm also excited for the Steelers receiving corps, and if Big Ben can return to most of what he was before his injury, I think the Steelers offense could improve and become a plus offense in the 2020 season. We're going to take a short break right now, and then I will talk more about some upcoming free agents, some past free agent signings, and where I see the Steelers going in 2020. And we're back. And the Pittsburgh Steelers' main free agent besides Juju Smith-Schuster is TJ Watt. Watt was a 2017 first-round pick, while Juju was a second-round pick in that draft. So the Steelers have his fifth-year option for 2021. But some players may choose to hold out over that year or flat out not play. So the Steelers would best look at getting a deal done as soon as possible. And I think that one of the Steelers' free agency moves of the 2020 offseason will help them in re-signing TJ Watt. They signed fullback Derek Watt to a 3-year, $9.75 million contract that expires after the 2022 season. Now, Watt's a free agent after 2021, so assuming that he's doing his contract negotiations in 2020 and 2021, he will likely be thinking about the ability to play with his brother for the same team, which is an opportunity very few people in the world have. And although paying over $3 million for a fullback is never really a good move, I don't think that money is solely being spent on Derek Watt as a football player and a fullback. If they are able to spend $3 or $2 million more on their fullback and get a bigger discount on TJ Watt, which I believe they will be able to do, it'll be a great move. We have some prominent edge rushers who need contracts, namely Joey Bosa from 2016, and then in 2017, Myles Garrett and TJ Watt. And although Watt's put up better numbers than Garrett's dealt with a suspension and has the physical tools that very few people in the world have. So Watt, especially if he wins Defensive Player of the Year in 2020, which I think is a very big possibility, demands a new record-setting contract of possibly $25 million. That would hurt the Steelers so much, which is why I think he will never do that if he gets to realize that he can play with his brother for less money. Because the Steelers have very little cap room for the future due to mostly Ben Roethlisberger and his enormous cap hit. So I think TJ Watt might be willing to take a big pay cut and sign for only $18, $19, $20 million to ensure that he gets to play with his brother. Now, in addition, the Steelers made some other small moves. They re-signed Mike Hilton. They re-signed Bud Dupree on the 1-year franchise tag, sort of a prove-it type deal. And they signed tackle Zach Banner. But they also lost cornerback Artie Burns. And speaking of the Steelers' defense a bit more, I expect a lot of regression. The team made a lot of fluke turnovers that I can't imagine them getting again. There are some plays where it's a designed lateral or pitch on the offense and the quarterback just completely misses the running back who's supposed to be getting the pitch. And because it's a throw behind the line of scrimmage, it's a fumble. And then the Steelers defense would just recover it, take it for 6. There are also plays where the quarterback is essentially throwing an air punt into the end zone, hoping for a touchdown. Because when you throw an air punt, you have 3 options. You have a miraculous catch by your wide receiver that leads to a huge gain or a touchdown. You have an interception in the end zone or within the 5-10 yard line, or you have an incompletion. Very few of those air punts actually end up hurting the offense, because if the defender makes the interception, you have a wide receiver there to tap them and make sure they're down on contact. If it's an incompletion, you then just punt it and it's really net 0. And if you catch it, you get a monster gain. So there are plays like that where the Steelers just got lucky and made interceptions, and they show up on the stat sheet as an interception, but in reality they're the same as a punt. In addition, the Steelers had some plays where a defender would just tip the ball up and another defender would just be in the right place in the right time and make the play. And although those plays show great awareness isn't all. It's a lot of luck. And the Steelers had all the luck on their side in terms of the forcing of turnovers in 2019. And although I expect them to be a plus defense, possibly top 5 in 2020, it's tough for me to imagine them having the same level of success, especially with aging players like Cam Hayward and the loss of Javon Hargrave. And as for the whole team, it's really tough to predict because there are a lot of question marks despite one of the most similar rosters to their 2019 self. The one biggest question mark is Ben Roethlisberger healthy? He's been shown to be cutting his beard, drinking a lot of beer, and not really taking it that seriously through social media. But he could be practicing a lot behind the scenes. He could be making sure that his body feels younger than it actually is, and he could be ready to take more hits after a year off. He also could have aged another year, lost arm strength, lost mobility, and hasn't been keeping up with the playbook and the offense. But it's tough for me to imagine that Roethlisberger is anything but better than Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges. And I think that Roethlisberger will lead them to at least a 7-9 record. And I think the team will be able to make the playoffs if their defense plays at a top 10 level, which the roster indicates they are capable of doing, and if the wide receivers take a step forward. And even if they trade Juju Smith-Schuster at the trade deadline, which is a possibility because there could be teams looking to make sure they get a playoff spot, and they think Juju is that final piece. And if the Steelers end up beating the Browns in their 2 games, which I believe is the bottom line, I think that the Steelers and Browns will be in contention for one of the final wildcard spots. And there are 7 now in each conference due to the new collective bargaining agreement. And I think one of the Steelers and Browns will take the 6th or 7th spot. And I believe the team that does better in their head-to-head rivalry, or if the Steelers go 1-1, they'll need to win another surprise game. Because I think we're going to see some regression on the defense, but we'll also see some positive regression on the offensive side of the ball. So if I were to project their record, I'd probably go 8-8 again, possibly 9-7. 10-6 is probably the ceiling for them, but they don't have a super low floor either. And I don't see them getting out of the wild card round, especially with powerhouses like the Ravens and Chiefs in their conference. And I think after 2020, it's only going to get worse as they'll have to look to find a successor to Ben Roethlisberger. Personally, I would have taken Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round because a 2nd round pick like Claypool can bring value. But if Hurts becomes a top 32 quarterback, he's worth probably a top 10, top 15 pick in any NFL draft. So taking a risk on him in the 2nd, similar to what the Jets have done with Geno Smith and Christian Hackenberg, is always a good bet, even if it doesn't work out. And now, next episode, I will be talking about the Jets and whose fault all of their offensive failures are. Do they all go on to Adam Gase, Sam Darnold, the offensive line, the lack of playmakers? I also want to touch on how much is Jamal Adams really worth? The answer is a lot. You'll have to see how much. I'm also going to hit on how Quinnen Williams can take a next step forward, whether or not Joe Douglas did a great job during the draft in his first free agency. And if you're still here, I just want to say thank you for watching my first episode. Like, subscribe, please. But most importantly, just tell anyone else that you know that enjoys football to watch this. If you know someone that's a Steelers fan, tell them to watch this. If you know someone that hates the Steelers, please tell them to watch this. If you know someone that doesn't really know a lot about the Steelers, tell them to watch this. For First and 10 Sports, I'm Daniel. Thank you.